ahead and get started. Thank you again for being here. Our COVID-19 Financial Oversight Committee will begin. We keep the agenda pretty broad so that we can get to the items we need. And we did want to talk about some of the clarity that the state has announced on their nonprofit funding, but we're going to wait just a little bit, and perhaps Representative Love will be here, as I think he might be able to add to that. And there were just a few other things that are kind of our normal housekeeping that I didn't put on there, which is again to review our framework and then also a legislative update. So we'll do those before we get to the clarity with the state nonprofit funding. So the framework I handed out for you is right underneath the agenda. And this is the same format, just a few minor changes. And then, of course, our important change is that we did have a approval from council this week of the $10 million. So again, thank you for your work on that. And thank you to the council for that approval. So as we look at the totals, again, remember that we have the 121.1. The numbers on the far right is everything that has been approved by the council. In our allocated, there are two numbers. The 32.1, I wanted to just kind of refresh your memory. Our total estimate for the city's response from a public safety and public health and all of the necessary expenses related to that is $48.8 million. That is higher than originally estimated. It was at 38.8, if you all remember kind of that number. And the difference there is that the estimate for the hazard pay has come in much higher, almost double, really, 10 million to potentially up to 20 million. We are still reviewing the eligibility for the Metro employees that qualify. So we don't have an exact, but based on who's already been deemed eligible. So, and that's paid at the end of the emergency time period. So if that's through December 30th, and that is an estimate through just December 30th, that's when that would be paid. So it's being accrued, but not paid out at this point. So that increases our estimate to 48.8 million. And the 16.7 million has already been approved. So that's why that 32.1 is in that column. It's been identified. I just want to point out that the phase 2, there is nothing specifically tied to that 30 million. You all may say that's more than we want to leave. You all may decide that's a smaller number. Remember, we haven't completely defined what phase 2 is. We just wanted to make sure that we were looking at the immediate needs and the urgency of getting some of these funds out, and that there was also the possibility of finding out that there was new legislation that will come into play, dates, extensions that might come into play, changes in the guidance. So we didn't want to not have any flexibility as new guidance and changes come forward. So that number is completely up to this committee. That is just an idea of a placeholder. And so if we start with 121 and we have what's already been committed and what's allocated, that's what that funds to be allocated in phase 1. It doesn't mean you can't take from that phase 2 bucket. I don't want to, that to be confusing or misleading. This committee has that, the full amount of that 5.5 left in phase 1 and the 30 million for phase 2. Councilmember Johnston?
The 48.8 million, and I know a lot of it is labor and hazard pay, and a lot of it is being just estimated, but I know that there's also some hard costs, so like PPE, safety supplies, equipment, things like that. Are we, and I've asked you this over email, but I do think it's worth having a conversation with the committee, is there any sort of audit feature with that? Because what I am hearing that's a little bit disturbing is that individual departments are maybe kind of going willy-nilly and like, oh, well, it's, the Metro emergency, whatever. And so they're just buying stuff, and who knows, are they comparing costs? of different things, like, there's a difference in some masks and other masks and cleaning products and other cleanup, like, what kind of controls do we have on that? Because that's a pretty big chunk out of the 121, and I personally would like to get as much of these dollars to our businesses, our individuals, the citizens. So I just want to make sure that we're spending that $48.8 million wisely.
Absolutely, that's a great question and an opportunity to share. I'd say first and foremost, the procurement process really prevents the individual departments from just going online and ordering something and having it sent. The procurement process at Metro is very detailed, very, policy and procedure with competitive bids or a sole source, provider. And there is an emergency procurement process, but it goes through quite a few steps, and it is intended to make sure that we're paying the right price, for the equipment and things that we need, that we're using approved vendors. So vendors have to be approved, so they've already gone through that process. And so departments don't have a carte blanche, I'm just going to buy whatever I think I need. The rules and regulations have been laid out to them with the guidance, and I have to compliment them. They're very, they're very judicious when they're making those expenses, and if they aren't sure, they will ask me. They will send me an email. They will call me and say, "Is this eligible?" And there are expenses that are deemed eligible, but we also we tried to separate between the immediate public emergency response and what I would call an enhanced ability to respond. And if it's in that enhancement, we're holding back. And so you don't see that the 48.8 truly is what is deemed in that emergency response. You have the list in front of you of what we call additional infrastructure expenditures to support or enhance that response. And those are the ones we're holding back on. So you are correct. The majority of the expenses fall within labor, and it is either internal labor of overtime, hazard pay, and some of it has been sick time, admin time, repurposed time. I'm happy to review those. I think we've kind of talked about what those were. But we also have a lot of temporary pay for staff that are working the shelters, that are working at the assessment centers. The assessment centers are a pretty good piece. So those are the types of expenses, along with what we talked about, kind of the cleaning and PPE and sanitation. So there is a process. They don't quite have a carte blanche to just buy anything.
So my question is related to, we have the 16.7 above that. Are those figures what are being used to derive the estimate based on assumptions that this is how much we've spent up through June 30th, and so through the rest of the year, we're assessing it based off of those needs?
Yeah, we made an original assessment about mid-May, and we have updated that as we've gone through more experience. As time goes by, we use what we've learned to increase or to decrease certain estimates, and they just kind of all move along. There's been pluses and minuses, and in general, it's been pretty much the same estimate of 38.8, but once we had looked more into the hazard pay, we think that through December 30th, that number will actually be closer to double that.
Adjust it down, like if they're breaking up in these categories, like I see one of the categories is building prep for workspaces and sanitation. I would assume that most buildings and workspaces have been prepped, right? So you're not going to need to prep them again. Has there been some give and take or ebb and flow through these?
That's all being accounted for in those estimates, yeah. Some of it's one time, some of it's ongoing. If it's one time, it's not being included in projection again.
Can I ask if any of this estimate would be covered under FEMA claim right now?
There are pieces, and we've actually netted some of that out of this estimate already, and that is an estimate. And so if the more that we can send to FEMA, we certainly will. We've already gotten some initial feedback. We've sent one package in, and we've gotten some feedback on some of those items. It was roughly about 10 to 12% came back with questions. It doesn't mean it's rejected, but that first round, it was questioned. And we're also hearing our consultants that we are using, that are FEMA experts, their colleagues around the city, some of the feedback. FEMA's being pretty tight. They certainly are not expanding their coverage for COVID.
Got it. Do we have an estimate of when we would hear back? Because if my math isn't mistaken, right, after the 10, we have 66 million left. If we go with the 48.8, that leaves us about 7.2 million to play with. Am I wrong?
The totals that haven't been out, I think you're double counting the 16.7, but let me double check my math on the fly. So there was 67.6 left. If we allocate the city's emergency response, there's 35.5.
Got it. Thank you.
How much was submitted to FEMA? What percentage of these amounts?
Oh, the package that we've submitted was just under $1 million, 967,000, I think. So it was a little bit of a test package, to kind of get a feel for what they will and will not accept. It was predominantly PPE. I wish I had the exact, it was over 900, it was like, just call it right around 950. And it was predominantly PPE. And of that, about 145, they had questions on. Again, it's not that they rejected it, but they had questions on it.
As we move through the process, considering this is, I'm assuming that 32.1 is supposed to carry us from July 1 through December 30, is it possible to get, even if it's just a separate sheet so we don't make this one more cumbersome for you, but just have that running total of where we are on that 32, because I feel like if there's an estimate and a burn rate, as we realize we're trending either ahead or if unfortunately behind it, I think that would be good to know as we start to think about how we can allocate more funds.
Yep, I'd be happy to.
So I did have a clarification question around hard assets. My understanding was that CARES Act money, at the end of it, you could not have assets. Was that an accurate understanding of what?
That is actually FEMA's perspective.
Okay.
So FEMA does not allow you to have an asset at the end of a disaster response. And so what they do, they have a clawback feature. So if you do purchase a piece of equipment and it's deemed to have value at the end of the response, they will, eliminate that amount from your reimbursement since you still have the asset. Within the guidance from the Coronavirus Relief Fund, there was clarification, and I think this is the first time I didn't actually bring my FAQs with me, but there are a couple questions, and one specifically in the FAQs, and I'd be happy to send it, talks about the ability to retain an asset at the end. And they said, if the purchase of that equipment is a necessary expenditure in accordance with all other eligibility guidelines, then you are allowed to have that asset at the end. There is not a clawback feature from the CRF. Okay, so I just wanted to make sure we all knew where we were with that. If you had any questions. Oh, I missed one.
Mary Jo,
Sorry.
I just got one other
Yes.
question. On this additional infrastructure, and I know we haven't gotten into talking about those specific items, this may or may not be the right way to look at it, but do we know that these are items that came up as a result of COVID as opposed to maybe things that were requested in a
Yes.
budget that were not approved?
Correct. They all came up post-COVID, and they are for things that would add to our response. So they, at the highest level, they meet the eligibility, and so that's why they've been included. And there are, and I did actually, I'm glad you asked. There was one of the department requests that I did not have detail on. So if you remember when I gave you the thick packet, so that when we get to the department requests, I did not have one from Office of Family Safety for some expansion of their work into some space that, that could be used for that. And so that's the one document I gave you today, just to put in with that, the thick stack of the other infrastructure requests.
Mary Jo, I had a question. I'm sorry to make everybody go back over this ground, but I was trying to figure out the math on how we get to the 35 number. Can you go back over that quickly
I
for me?
can, happy to. So I just started with our first 121. And if you subtract everything from that column, you have the 5.5. But that 30 million for phase 2 it's not assigned, it's not accounted for. So that's really the other piece. And that is assuming we want to fully fund the city's response. So I've excluded the 32.1 to make sure that we fully fund the city's response. But after that, that 30 plus the 5.5.
And I apologize for my ignorance here, but when you look at the additional infrastructure bucket, all those were deemed to be eligible, right? Come out of the CARES. Below that, starting with supporting Metro Nashville down through reinforcing, are those also?
Yes.
Okay, so everything
Yes.
qualified.
Yep. At the highest level, you know, would there be a component? And here's an example. Sorry, it's actually a different bucket. There's actually buckets that we're trying to find for all of these things. So if it's not all out of our coronavirus relief fund, we're looking at other opportunities. But they have been the request that's been made here, if we can find other funding sources. And of course, we talked a little bit about also asking the state if there was any additional opportunity to partner with them in some of these other requests.
And then, just follow up, I apologize. To that end, if we discover there may be 2 other funding sources or potential, are we redirecting them there and pulling them out of this list? And then will we allow each of these to come in to do a 5-minute presentation of what they want to do?
I think I've heard that, at least one, I think Councilmember Johnston made that same suggestion. So when, yes, when the committee is ready to kind of think about, okay, we're ready to kind of look at some of this enhanced response, I think that would be the best thing to do, is have the departments come in, set a time limit.
And then just asking maybe the committee, is that something we'd want to schedule for 2 weeks from today, to give people a week to prepare or ask questions and a week to do their presentation? Because probably like all of you, when you get some inbound, every phone call I've gotten so far is, we're going to get fill in the blank, 3 million, right? And I tell everyone, I don't know. I don't think so, though.
Right.
Because none of those people you know. And really, when you look at it, we have 5.5 to allocate. Maybe some of 30, maybe not. So when you're looking at $50 million of requests, I think the faster we bring them in to paint the right picture for them and maybe find other sources, the better off we're all going to be.
Do you all want to set 2 weeks from today?
For
hear-
the
To hear from department?
I think you got a couple of questions real quick from
Okay.
Google and Johnson.
Yes, I have a question about the FEMA, and you mentioned that most of your proposal to them has PPE. Is there anything else in there that, that we can include in that request, or that is already included, so that we don't have to look at that for this funding, such as, and I think we talked about the word sanitation can't be used, but for cleaning public spaces and that kind of thing? I mean, we haven't even talked about that. Is some of that?
Yes, there's quite a bit more that we will be sending.
Okay.
And some of the biggest pieces will probably be our overtime.
Okay.
The overtime component, because that was not in budget, that qualifies for FEMA.
Okay, that's great.
So our overtime labor and then some of the other expenditures would qualify.
Okay.
Again, we kind of went with what we thought was the easiest piece,
Right.
which was PPE.
Okay, that's great to know. Thank you.
And as we make more applications, I'd be happy to let you know how much they were and when we hear back. We don't always hear back quickly, but we do get an idea of feedback.
Thank you.
I just wanted to point out that before this committee first ever even met, Chief Swan had reached out to me and probably others to go over his list and fight for his department, which I appreciate. When you look at the math and you go, hey, we've got $35.5 million left, and we haven't even discussed departmental, we haven't even discussed food relief, we haven't even discussed business relief, that type of thing. I just, full disclosure, and Mary Jo knows this, I went to Chief Swan and I was like, hey, you're requesting like $28.5 million and all we've got left is this. And so what I really think it would help the committee out, because this is a huge list and I feel like we owe it to each of these departments to really go line item by line item to look at what they're requesting. And so to that point, I asked him to really go through and prioritize, because I don't want to waste a bunch of time on things that are like these wish list things. I know it would be great, but so he came back with a revised list that went from $28.5 million to $2.815. So, which is significant, and I super appreciate that. So I'm thinking that when we ask these departments to come and present to us, to really help them to understand, we don't have $121 million.
Right.
And so could you please look at your list and make sure that what you're asking for is something that's really, really needed and really, really legitimate, because not only is it not going to happen, but just for the interest of the time of the committee to not have to pour through and all that kind of stuff. So I just wanted to say that.
That's a great point. And I did want to you will see, if you remember from the framework from last week, it did have that 28.4.5 million. And here it now says 5. Councilmember Johnston just pointed out it's really 2.8, but the other 2.2 was PPE. And so that, we believe, should be covered through FEMA. And so that was why that was reduced. These were printed. And so, again, back to the point that we continue to try to whittle away at this list to get accurate numbers. So thank you for that.
And understanding that obviously we've got a pretty dynamic situation, and so FEMA may cover more, we may get other funding other places, so there's going to be some very dynamic moving pieces, and so to get the departments sort of what they need, but then if there's something extra, we can revisit type thing. So this isn't just an end all be all, but to communicate that, yeah, just please prioritize.
Are there any other questions on this in particular? I was going to ask Ashley to give us kind of a legislative update, as that tends to perhaps give us an idea of what's happening or maybe what's not happening.
Ed, did you have a question? Oh. Sure, I'll be happy to. So what we know from the federal government is there's no update. The latest things that have come out have said that if they don't have a pathway forward by the end of this week, they're a little concerned that there won't be one. The number one things that we've heard is likely we would get an extension on the time to spend the money, but not an extension on how much money it is, meaning we would just have to stretch this further. We've been told the state's probably looking at this in a similar manner, that they're expecting the same, of not banking on anything coming, and that they're going to have to make this last longer. So it's certainly something to take into consideration. That's where we're at on the federal side. As far as we'll get into this in the different areas, but as far as like with small businesses, they are looking at, they mentioned it on their call last week on the 3rd. They had a meeting right after y'all. And they mentioned that they were going to do another round of funding. It's something they want to do for small businesses, probably the ones that they missed the first time. So maybe businesses that weren't closed due to COVID, but are still drastically impacted. So thinking about like your wedding industry. And so they'll be looking at that probably in the next couple of weeks. So as we get into these discussions, at least you guys have that information. Do you guys have questions about anything? I know that was not super helpful.
What is current? Okay, and so we will move on to food insecurity. I know we addressed our, at least from a preliminary perspective, rent and mortgage and utilities, and we really debated about food, and we thought it might be really helpful for you all to hear again from the experts. So thank you to Nancy Keel for being here, President and CEO of Second Harvest. And Nancy, if you wouldn't mind sharing with the committee, what is the current landscape from a food perspective?
Thank you, guys. I'm Nancy Kyle, and this is Kim Molnar. She's the Chief Operating Officer at Second Harvest as well. Quickly, I just wanted to let you guys know, I did ask Ashley to hand out to you just an overview of the work that we've been able to do with a number of community partners since COVID, since the tornado, quite honestly, and since COVID came into play. And to just give you an idea of the landscape, we use a metric called a meal gap to help us understand the number of people that are food insecure. And if you look at Davidson County alone, those numbers pre-COVID, and the numbers are, these are 2018 numbers, but it was right about 85,000 people are food insecure just in Davidson County. The COVID numbers that we have just in these couple of short months is 121,350, and that's a 43% increase in a few short months. And those of you that remember back in the time when we had the Depression, everything that went with the economic downturn, it took 10 years for food insecurity numbers to go back to where they were pre that time. And we're hoping that things have changed and it's not going to take 10 years, but it certainly is going to take years. So just to give you an idea of what that looks like. Thank you for allowing us to be a leader in this and work with all our partners. We have fed a lot of people. Just this past fiscal year, we've put out over 42 million pounds of food to people that are food insecure, and that still is not anywhere near enough. Now, when I talk about the 42 million pounds, that does cover our 46 counties, but Davidson County is our biggest population with the most folks that are impacted. Moving to kind of what the state kind of asked us to do to kind of help you understand what happens here is Second Harvest is the largest hunger relief organization in the state of Tennessee. There are 4 other food banks that are sister food banks of ours that we work with, and the request came to us if we would be the folks to be an administrator for the funds. We said the only way we would be an administrator if it was only for emergency food assistance. That's what we do, that's what we know. We don't need to be in any other situation. Quite honestly, they thought they'd come back to us and say no, but they came back to us and said, yes, we want you to be administrator for the state. Of the $150 million that they have allocated for this COVID response, they have authorized us up to $15 million for emergency food assistance. Of that $15 million, if we are the ones that actually process it, because people can go to any of the 6 administrators, we would get 3% of that as an administrative fee for Second Harvest. We have no clue if it'll be something significantly less than that or 15 million. If at the point when all the applications are in that there's additional funds that are available, they said that there may be a second window that would open. They said that our 15 million, if food assistance is so needed, that number could go up, but we have no idea of what that number would look like. They said we would probably know something in the September time period. Because if there is additional funds, they said there would be a second window to open for people to apply. Right now, we don't see applications until August the 10th. And then what happens is we tell people, they start getting informed starting August the 17th. They have until November 15th to spend the funds. With that, Ashley asked me, she goes, well, where does that leave Second Harvest? And the reason that we're doing this is because we know how important hunger is in Tennessee. We actually, our percentage of food insecurity is higher than the national average. It's a little over 14%. So there's a lot of work we've got to do. And so with us being the largest hunger relief organization and having that expertise, we said, we will do this. We hope we get upwards of $450,000 that out of this as an administrative fee. But quite honestly, if we were an applicant, we would be applying to the max amount, which is $2 million. So at 750, it goes to, we would approve it, and then also the state would be involved, DHS would be involved with a second approval on something, but the most people can ask for is $2 million. And we've already had a number of people call us and say, can we ask for 2.6? And we have to say, no, your max is 2, but there may be a second window that opens up. At Second Harvest right now, financially, if you look at our operating costs, we're at a 38% increase in our operating cost every single month. That started when COVID came into play. We have tried to do the best job we can forecasting what that might look like, but every month it stays in the 38-40% increase. Today, we have funds over the next couple of months that were good, but we are extremely concerned with the long-term food assistance that we're going to need to supply people. And like I said, we're not even covering everybody today. We're doing the best we can, and this is going to go on for a long time. So we are doing a lot of work in Davidson County and in the other counties we support, working with other partnerships, figuring out other things that we need to do. We are out everywhere asking for funding for folks to make sure that we have those funds to do the work that we need to do. And I'll stop there and allow questions.
Nancy, first, thank you for the work that you and your team over at Second Harvest are doing. You mentioned, and you kind of wrapped up with that, reaching out and asking for funds from any and all directions. As we're tasked with allocating a small amount of funds of what we're doing, what would you say has been the reception for those requests in the current campaigns for funding? Would you say they're good? Would you say they're strong? Would you guys say you're just not having enough income to match the amount of outgoing expenses, like you said, higher operating costs?
So I'll start with telling you our operating costs always exceed the money that we're able to get in, and because it just costs a lot to run our facilities and our trucks and everything. But I will tell you, we have right at 10,000 new donors that have given to us. We exceeded our planned budget for this past year significantly, and we were able to roll over excess cash of $5 million because of those donors. Now, that was during the heat of tornado. A lot came in. Matter of fact, we got funding from every single state except for Wyoming during the tornado. People were just, any amount. A lot of people that got stimulus checks they sent the money to us. Some people, CEOs went out and got jobs at Kroger and sent their Kroger checks to us. So we had a lot of people step up. The community has been amazing, but there's still so much more that is needed. That generosity has not stopped, but it has slowed down significantly. So again, today, just as a nice little surprise for us, Nissan makes a donation to us every year, and you guys follow Nissan. They've been through a lot, and they typically give us a $100,000 gift. And surprised us today, came in and said, we're here to give you your check for all the work you do, but we decided to double it. So it doesn't happen every day, but for us, every dollar that we bring in can provide 4 meals. So we are extremely efficient. So we're pleased with where we sit at this moment, but quite honestly terrified at the long-term future and how many new people we're seeing standing in food lines.
Yes, just for clarification, you mentioned the $150 million. Was that from what the state received and then Nashville received, or the Second Harvest received the $15 million? I wasn't quite clear.
No, thanks for asking that. So the $150 million is the CARES funds that they're distributing. I don't know if they distributed the whole 150. They have told us for emergency food assistance that we would be able to allocate up to $15 million. So for example, when we get them in, we're grading them. If we get in $30 million, we can only allocate for 15.
I can elaborate a little bit on that for you, Councilwoman. The $150 million was established just for nonprofits. So that link that we sent you with the links of the application process, so that's where the United Way of Nashville, Chattanooga, Knoxville, there's a group out of Memphis, and then Second Harvest, they've all gotten those funds to distribute at different amounts. So like she said, there's this $15 million for food specifically. So I think, was it United Way got $60 million, is that right? I believe they're getting? I actually don't know. Okay. And so that's where that is, but the application is just for nonprofits to help them.
Is the 15 million for statewide or just Davidson?
Statewide.
Got it. And do you know how much you all would be allocating just for Davidson County?
I do not. There wasn't guidance provided on that, but we do have, there is a training tomorrow with more information, because as you guys know, this is happening pretty quickly. And the questions we got a lot of questions, but there hasn't been anything shared with us as far as certain allocation for certain parts of the state or counties or anything like that.
Do you have an estimate of what you believe you would need for Davidson County?
Do I have an S? I have.
Looking at your report, one of the things that's such a challenge about what we're doing, just like it is for you with an allocation, is trying to figure out where are the critical needs, how many other sources might there be to meet those, where do we need to be paying attention right now to really fill a gap. And when you look at these different programs, you look at Davidson County, which is our focus, my question is, can you identify right now what the most urgent gaps are in terms of food security in Davidson County, and which programs might be best structured to suit them?
Yeah, matter of fact, we spent quite a bit of time talking about that, and I'll let Kim touch on some of those programs because I think that's a great question, and they're far and wide, but they do touch families, seniors, and children.
Thank you for the question. I would say our approach has been particularly everywhere, but particularly for Davidson County, is to try to get into neighborhoods with smaller distributions. I know you've all seen on the news, long lines at mobile pantries and horrifying. And we could have done that. We could have asked to do a distribution at Nissan Stadium and have all those lines and made the news, but we don't feel like that's how you serve people with dignity. So we have chosen to go smaller, more frequent, more dispersed distribution. So the restaurant meals and all the things you have in there are examples of those. The way we serve the city primarily with food insecurity is through our emergency food box sites. We operate 15. We currently have 12 that are open. 3 are closed. 2 are community centers, and 1 is Keene Avenue Baptist. So there are 3 sites closed, and one of the community centers that operates an emergency food box site is Napier Community Center, which is a food desert in a high-need area, and we have no presence there. There's been a few restaurant meals distributed, there's been a few things going on, but nothing significant enough to really fill that need in the Napier-Sudicum area. So I would identify that as an immediate high-need area. We have been in conversation with Neighborhood Health to perhaps go into their facility as an emergency food box site. I don't know when the community centers will be able to operate again, emergency food box site. But that requires funding for that. They are not set up for the refrigeration and the food and all the things that would have staffing that would have to happen for them to operate. I'm trying to think if there was anything else. We are currently running some what we call summer feeding sites for children with the schools shutting down as quickly as they did. And they are still operating, even though schools have started. There are still 6 sites operating that are serving 600 children. Again, smaller distributions to hit people in different places. We're providing 902 boxes a month to MDHA to hit seniors in the towers. So and that's where the needs are. The needs are small, they're large in aggregate, but they need to be a lot of many programs implemented to hit people where they are and with dignity. Does that answer your question?
No, that's helpful. I think just the more we get a sense of what could be helpful and where could it be quickly implemented, I think is just what we're trying to get a sense of, because the overall issue is just so big and broad.
Good to see you all. Thank you again for your help. Just to give everybody an update, one of the challenges that we were made aware of the other day is that for the nonprofit grants, and we didn't know this until we had already approved it and were going into it, the grants that you all would be administering are fully reimbursable. And that was going to be a problem for a lot of our smaller nonprofits because there was no upfront money for them to operate. So I called Commissioner Ely yesterday, and I have a meeting with him tomorrow in an effort to make sure that we can advance some of the money to the smaller nonprofits, because if it's fully reimbursable, as you know, the problem's going to be, number one, they don't have the money to front any project, particularly if you're looking at smaller nonprofits getting to smaller places. Secondly, the turnaround time for reimbursement from the state may be a month. And so we should be able to resolve that very soon, which will help us move a lot faster from the state level and help you do your job easier also, because we're giving local governments out at 115 30% upfront, and the other 70% is reimbursable. And so my point to him is we should do the same thing for nonprofits, because you can figure out on the front end whether the request that they're making is going to fit into the CARES Act qualifications. And so I think this will help move things a lot faster and get a quicker turnaround time, even with the food piece.
Is there any sort of guidance that you can give us? I mean, we have to figure out, how much money are we going to give, to who are we going to give it, and for what purpose? And so obviously there's a food insecurity need. Is there any sort of guidance that you could give us for the need for Davidson County in a dollar amount, just to help us get some sort of framework, even if it's a range, that would be helpful? I mean, obviously the more the better, but something that's reasonable that you think, understanding that we don't have, you heard our conversation, we've got 35 and a half and a lot of need. Is there any sort of guidance you could give us?
Sorry, I got air got in my throat. I'm so sorry. I don't know that I would like to think on that and get back with you, but if I was looking at just on the meal gap numbers, when you look at the Davidson County and you look at the old numbers, not new numbers, and the meals that we're providing, there still are over 5 million meals. And if the cost of the meal based on the math that we have are $3, what does that come to? Is that $15 million or something like that? So just to give you just raw numbers based on what we know is a gap, I would say 15 million. And that's just Davidson County.
Right, okay.
Nancy, for clarification, what kind of time period is that 5 million? I mean, is that on an annual basis?
It's annual basis,
Okay.
yes.
I just wanted to follow up on that. Is that estimate based on March through July 31st?
The meal gap numbers are on a annual basis, yes.
Do you have an estimate of how many meals or food was distributed with your partners from March 1st through July 31st?
Over 17.5 million.
And the cost of that would be?
Well, we're running at basically 2.2 million in operating expense a month.
Would it be fair to say, just for numbers, if you are normally for Davidson County, $15 million in need for the year, we've seen a 40-ish% increase in need due to COVID. So that would move that number to a $21 million need. And we're looking at the last quarter, so October, November, December, because you said you feel like you're pretty good for the next couple of months, right? So to fill in the gap for the next, so if I divide 21 million into the 2 quarters, that's 5.25 million. Is that something reasonable to just, 10,000 foot view?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I guess the next question would be if the committee is comfortable allocating around 5.25, was that number you said? Or if we want to give it a little bit more time to see what happens at the state level.
I'm running you crazy, sorry. Or do we allocate a portion of what we think the, 5.25, do we allocate 2.5 million? Because in the interest of time, obviously there's the same thing with United Way, with okay, well now we gotta get it through council, now we gotta get it, the contract, blah, blah, blah. I mean, as far as, so is that something that we should entertain? Is like, let's get something out there with the sense of urgency, emergency need, so that they're prepared for it? Or if we do that now, would that lessen the urgency on the state's part to step up to fill the gap? Like, we all already got $2.5 million. Now we don't need, I mean, is that valid?
So one of the arrangements we have with the state is that when we put a plan together for Nashville, it helps give the state guidance on what they can do to support Nashville. The $115 million that was set aside for local governments was set aside for every county but Davidson and Shelby, because we had already received money. But the agreement was that they would look at our plans and see what we were doing and help support what we were doing. So I think it's consistent to say, let's put something in now, only because by the time you get applications in for the $150 million, it's what, next week?
Yeah, August the 10th is when we start having access to applications.
Right, so then you'll get the applications in, and you won't be able to approve until what date?
The first date that we can start notifying people that their application's been accepted is August the 17th.
All right, and so next council meeting is when?
The 18th.
2 weeks from yesterday, or 2 days ago, 18th, yeah.
All right, so my belief is that in this instance, Metro just would be moving faster just in the approval process to get something in, and it would hit around the same time that you would even approve someone and then release the funds another week probably from your time of letting them know that they've received the award, and then get them to get up on their feet. So I think it's putting money in won't cause the state to be stagnant. Let me say that.
That was my only concern, is like, I don't want them to be like, oh, you're good. So are we like, I hate to do this in front of y'all, but do we feel comfortable using Second Harvest? I mean, my desire would be, same point of using United Way. They know what they're doing, and they've kind of got that process and procedure. And I also like the fact that it's go here. If you have a food insecurity, this is where to go, instead of having a list of other things. So I personally feel good about using Second Harvest. Does that, I mean?
I just picked this up to echo what you're saying. We can't make any mistake using Second Harvest. I mean, Nancy, thanks for what you guys do and being here. I mean, if we're going to do something for food shortages and insecurity, to me, there's only one entity to use, and it's our friend sitting over there.
Yeah, Representative Love, if I can ask, one of the things, for a point of clarity, one concern that we have heard from a handful of nonprofits have already asked us, on the state application for a nonprofit, it does say if you are receiving CARES Act funds, from another source, you are not eligible. And I believe the intention, this is where I want you to correct me, I believe the intention is that you cannot double dip. If you had $100,000 in COVID-related expenses, you couldn't get 100 from Metro and 100 from the state. But if you got 40 from Metro, could you cover your other 60 from the state? It's not worded that way. It doesn't say you can't double dip. It says you cannot apply.
Right, and I think the intent is to do what you're saying is to keep them from applying for $100,000 from both entities.
Correct.
It's also to keep Harold Love Enterprises from applying for $40,000 from the state and then sub-granting to somebody else who didn't apply, and then also applying to Metro.
Okay.
See, so it's designed, because what's going to happen is you're going to have some nonprofits, unfortunately, that don't have the paperwork together, and you don't want them to use another nonprofit to, well, if you get your 40, you give us all 10, and you can still get 40 from Metro. So it's designed also to keep you from doing that piece. I think we're safe allowing a nonprofit to receive money from Metro government and then still apply to the state, particularly in the case of Second Harvest, to be an administrator, but then also get a direct allocation from Metro. Because in that instance also, it's two different situations.
It is.
Because they're not a nonprofit applying to deliver services from the state level. They're a nonprofit applying to be the administrator, if I'm correct, of other grants for nonprofits.
Yeah, and it is confusing what you ask, and we've been answering that question a lot starting Saturday morning. And it is meant to mean if you have applied for COVID relief before, PPP, whatever funding that you asked for, if you got that from another source, you can't ask for that same thing. But let's say you only did PPP for a certain amount of time, but you didn't apply from March 1 to March 15th. You can apply for those funds. So it's unclear. It was also a little unclear because they said first come, first serve, and it's not first come, first serve. So they've been out clarifying that now, and we're even doing some paid Facebook posts and everything, trying to get that out, and we're sending a ton of emails out to all our partners, and to your point, we're really our outreach is to a lot of the smaller nonprofits. Because to your point on when do they get the money back, because a lot of this money's already been spent. I mean, so people aren't necessarily looking for down the road, how about what I spent from March? It's August. And so the sooner they get that funding, the better. But they can, if they've gotten COVID funding before, as long as it's not a duplicate amount for the same, they call it program, then they can apply.
And I think in this instance, particularly nonprofits who are applying, probably would not have gotten funding from any other source because there were no other sources set up to really distribute money to nonprofits. Matter of fact, the issue we were having with our small business relief was nonprofits couldn't qualify because you weren't generating revenue to submit taxes on, and so there was no replacement of your lost revenue. And so I think one thing to also remember is that much of this $150 million, the $115 for local governments, and this thing for broadband we're doing, much of this is coming out of the set-aside that we had, thinking that we were going to use it for revenue replacement that we now can't, and we're trying to rush also and get all this out.
Two other things that it's worth clarifying is if a nonprofit applies, they cannot use subrecipients, so they can't get funding and then give it to someone else. Like we get funding and we also do things, we subrecipient to other nonprofits to lift them up. So you absolutely cannot do that. And then there was one other thing that I was going to say tied to the restrictions. Oh, and their request is the minimum amount that you can ask for is $25,000. They have asked us that we pay, we're focused on that. The one thing I was trying to clarify is there are going to be some that $25,000 is just going to be, if you can't replicate that down the road, I mean, you'll be out of business at some point in time. So there could be some that are smaller amounts. So we're just going to keep an eye on that. And they said for us, we'll just have to go back and ask, are we okay to approve this if it's for $10,000 for a small group? But I thought the 25, I think they're trying to keep it to where we get to the amount faster, but I hate to leave out some of the small nonprofits.
This question, I don't know who it's to, but do we have to prove, as far as like accounting, that this money that we would possibly give to Second Harvest, that they follow through to make sure that it's going just to Davidson County residents, since this is Davidson County Cares? Like, what's the reporting mechanism there? Because I would think you'd have to have like a separate account and the whole thing. So is that?
We can do that.
That's okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
we have restricted grants and stuff all over the place. We typically prefer not to have, since we serve 46 counties, a designation like that, but we absolutely can, and we've got very good financial.
Okay.
I just wanted to add, the required reporting would be that it was serving individuals in Davids County and that were impacted by COVID. And while that seems like a pretty easy criteria, it does have to be documented that some certification or proof of unemployment or business closures or some kind of impact of COVID.
With what you stated, I just want to make sure I have this for clarification purposes. The administration of this grant precludes Second Harvest from tapping into it from a service provider standpoint at all. Like, you are purely providing application review and distribution services, and this is not in any way, form, or fashion a portion carved out that Second Harvest can utilize to deliver services.
We cannot apply, but we do get the 3% of whatever we award.
And the second part of my question is, if you just stated this correctly, I want to make sure it's clear. It sounds like Second Harvest actually prefers, in your business model, to work with smaller groups. And currently, with the understanding you have, I know there's training coming and there's some more opportunities for it to change, but currently, the way it's presented to you is you aren't able to work with those smaller groups because their requests may not meet a certain threshold. Is that correct?
As it relates to the COVID funding, so they're asking that applications be at $25,000 and up. So what I don't want a small nonprofit to have to do, if they can't come up with $25,000, but they've spent 10, or they have a need for 10, that they can't apply. So we're encouraging them to apply as we talk to them, because we, just in Davidson County alone, we have, I think, 110 nonprofits that are our partners. And we have 460 across our 46 counties. And we want those partners and others to have access to these funds. But that is just something that we have to follow the guidelines of what the state is asking us to. So all their FAQs are for 25, but there are a lot of people saying, but can we still apply?
Thank you for that understanding.
Two of your sort of high-volume programs relate to sort of the extended summer of public school students. And so I guess my question is, let's say hypothetically that in-person schooling starts in September. How will that change what you do for those programs? I'm just not quite sure I understand the interplay between the school system and what you're doing for the students.
So for MNPS, I'll talk about that first, and I'll let Kim talk a little bit about the children's feeding sites. But with MNPS, we meet every Tuesday with them and the rest of the food security task force that the mayor asked us to pull together. And right now we're saying, okay, through the end of August, we're going to continue. We do the weekly distribution, so they're doing the breakfast and lunch. And that's good because the kid's getting food, but what about the rest of the family? You don't want the rest of the family eating the children's food. So we're doing the food boxes. And the plan is we're on an evolving, depending on what happens with schools, and we're going to learn more. When we talk next Tuesday, we'll find out how things went this week. Our plan is right now that we're going to continue that, but we may have to change locations. We may need to do more. We may need to do less. So every week we talk about it, and we just adjust as needed. Now, from the school children's feeding sites, right now you said we have 6 in Davidson County operating, and those are continuing. And those, again, were things that we set up as it relates to COVID because no one expected school to be out for such a long break. So we set those up pretty quickly in Davidson County.
Okay.
Those are continuing.
Can I ask, do you all have data on the communities that you all have served? Ethnicity, age, any of that? Do you all have that?
On the communities we serve? Yes.
Yes.
On each of the counties, we have information on food insecurity numbers down to every county, every congressional level.
Okay.
Oh, wait, Kim wanted to jump in.
On Davidson County specifically, we luckily started a new software program, Link to Feed, in February. And so that is an intake system that we're using at an emergency food box sites that does exactly that. Zip code, demographics, all of that. Now, I will say, we started in February, and then March happened, and ongoing, and the emergency food box sites were overrun. So I wouldn't lay my life on the line for the data that they've collected. They've been swamped. But I do think we could pull some pretty good reports that would give pretty good oversight on that.
Got it. Okay. So I just have a question. If we allocate this money to y'all, what is the next process? Will you all partner with these organizations, these nonprofits you guys have been partnering with to distribute the food, or it will be your office specifically?
Everything we do is about partnerships. So we would, if we have the funding, and we're continuing these conversations every week that we meet, what do we need to be doing? Like Kim mentioned, Napier, we talk a lot about different pockets of the city. We started a partnership with Connexion, making sure that we've got that community partnered with. We started doing fresh produce boxes, stuff we'd never done before. So with the funding, we'd go back and assess where the need is. We have heat maps, all that to say where's the need and what could we do, all the way down to, working with church buses to help get vans and stuff with Brenda getting out there with her crew to deliver meals to families in need.
Got it. Okay. Well, for the committee, I think we all seem to be in agreement that we should be using Second Harvest. Is that the consensus? Well, then with that being said, I'm going to move to allocate 2.5 million to Second Harvest with the requirement that they provide us with data breaking down neighborhood zip codes, those who have been served, ages, all of that information, and if anyone wants to add.
Was intended, but it would be Davidson County only. And also, just to clarify, I know that everything Second Harvest does is designed to help vulnerable populations, but certainly we do want to make sure, I think, that the priority is to try to use the money, since it won't cover everything, obviously, but to address the most vulnerable.
Just one thing to flag for y'all, you guys did see the email that came out about the 60 million that's also available for food from the state that we shared with you. That's just to keep that in mind as you guys are going forward.
One of the unfortunate realities that we're dealing with is that no one wakes up wanting to be without food. And sometimes the stigma of asking for help is difficult to overcome. And sometimes it's easier to go to Second Harvest than it is to go to the state. And that's what we're seeing, is that people just don't want to apply for what some folks deem as entitlement programs. They don't want to apply for food stamps because of the stigma that goes along with that. And that's why you have this deluge of money that is sitting there. It's okay to go to Second Harvest, which is great. It's okay to go to Second Harvest because everybody goes there. Second Harvest helps with disaster relief. And mentally, that's the challenge we're having to overcome because of the conversation I had with constituents who are calling about unemployment. It's difficult to ask for unemployment assistance because we have weaponized government assistance so much that unemployment, TANF are bad words. And so, this is the route we're having to take to get to some of those other populations who just aren't comfortable going and applying through DHS and waiting for that card to come. So,
I would like to add in the resolution proposed by Councilwoman Sepulveda that we, in listening to your report about the need for smaller organizations being eligible for funding, I think you mentioned something about the $25,000 threshold, but really wanting to make sure we focus also on those smaller nonprofit organizations that may just need 10,000, 5,000, so that we make sure that that's one way to kind of stretch the dollars, as well as making sure that we're meeting needs in those smaller areas and smaller neighborhoods that may not need as much, but need that support.
sorry, to that point, what would a good threshold number be? I mean, what I don't want to do is to have it be so low that you're inundated with a ton of applications, which just makes your job that much harder. So is $5,000 too low, too high? Is $10,000 more? Like, what would you say would capture the people that need, but less than the 25? What's a good number?
5,000 would be probably pretty low. I would say
Do 10?
10.
Okay.
I would say 10. I did want to say to Representative Love, we make SNAP outreach a part of everything we do. So we have SNAP outreach specialists on staff, and we believe that is the best way to help move people out of hunger, is to access those. And I just want you to know that we are actively engaged in that.
I understand you all are located in probably one of the best house districts in this state. But I just want to lift up that that's the challenge we're having. So I thank you for the outreach, because you're overcoming those barriers of the stigmatization with getting assistance.
I just have a clarifying question based on what you asked. So on the 2.5, some of the questions were asked about how we would distribute that food is how we would get food assistance to people is different than nonprofits applying for grants. So are we trying to do this to where we're asking people to ask us for funds, or for us to initiate our programs with our partners and our EFBs in Davidson County?
What would be the most efficient use of funds?
Okay. It could be a combination.
Okay.
Would food,
Right. Like, I want to spend the least amount of money on administrative, these fees and all that kind of stuff. I want to get as much of the dollars going to food to put in people's mouths as possible. So you tell us,
So what if you think about our emergency food boxes, we supply the food. So it's a combination of what we get donated and what we purchase, and we get that food to those sites. We provide the volunteers with a small stipend. We feel like they need more to be able to be incentivized to get out. We probably need to market more to people to know that where their locations are. But that is not us giving another nonprofit funds. Now, if you go to some of our other nonprofits, pick a small one, Little Pantry That Could, or Grace Works, that's in a different county. Some of our smaller pantries, if we go through the time where they have to apply for something, it seems like that takes a lot of time. What we do now is we give them donated food, and they also get purchased food and stuff from us. What we've been doing over the last number of months is we're not charging them for that purchased food that they get from us, which is another way to get them more foods, because they're the boots on the ground in the community. I would think doing our partner, like what we do with Connexion with the produce boxes, they've never done food before, and so we started creating these produce boxes, and we'll send over 500 boxes. Our truck will deliver it, and they let their folks know, and they drive through and they put the produce boxes. So there's no cost to Connexion. It's just their volunteers out there putting food in the trunk. But it is not a grant. It is a partnership that we have with all the nonprofits.
Right.
Does that make sense? You want to add to that, Kim?
It would be my preference to go that route, because I feel like that's the most efficient use of the funds, to, where more money's going to food versus administration. And if y'all have a way of managing, donated food can do this, that, and the other. To me, I would say the whole $2.5 million should go just to you and your partners. Does everybody agree with that?
I have a question. So the 5.5 million estimated need, and in that total, were you thinking for Second Harvest administering food to partners, or were you thinking the grants to partners with the food, boots on the ground, hitting communities that need services?
The thought on the 2.5 that you guys mentioned for Second Harvest was to continue the work with our 100+ partner agencies in Davidson County, our EFB sites, to get food out in the communities. And I think what Kim and I would look at is those high need, you very specifically talked about COVID, vulnerable people that we serve. So we would identify those and get that food out there. It would not be through any kind of a grant process. So it would just be a partnership, and we're going to send you more food. We're going to give you a stipend for something, just so they can stay open maybe more hours, maybe be open at night or something like that. You want to add anything?
The only thing I would add to that is we also would continue to reach the folks that don't know how to get food assistance. So the hospitality industry that has been so devastated, a lot of those folks have never been in the situation to reach out for help and don't know where to go and don't know what to do. And so a lot of the things we have done has been to try to reach those folks, and we would expand that and continue it.
With this, and what I was, just to clarify, I was talking about the initial estimated need of 5.5, and then we suggested the 2.5, but also, you mentioned that the Napier area is someplace where you don't have a site. Would that money be useful in addressing that need as well?
I will be happy to call Brian Hale on my way back to the food bank about getting something going in his facility now.
To call for a vote, I feel like when we're 2:20 in time, and we still have to talk about small business. So I think we're all on board with Ms. Sepulveda's motion to allocate $2.5 million. Oh,
Just want to make sure I'm supporting it, but who seconded the motion?
I did.
Okay.
So the $2.5 million to Second Harvest for them to service using their partners with the reporting feature. I'm a yes. Oh, sorry.
There was also a discussion about a $10,000 limit. Is that part of your motion too? And I would also add, do you want this to be consistent with the with some of the language from the last resolution, since the guiding, using the preliminary report as a guide, those
Equity
things?
Alliance preliminary report.
Yes, that language, but let me clarify, because I think we don't need the $10,000 threshold because we're not applying, nobody's applying anymore. So we
Okay,
can.
so that's out, okay.
Yeah, so that's out, right. Cool, yes. So with all of that clarification, I'm a yes vote.
And just one more clarification, using the Our Fair Share data, but also Councilwoman Sepulveda suggested additional data that the Second Harvest Food Bank has in regards to demographics for the people they serve.
Yep, I think we are ready to vote. I think we'll go by hands as we have in the past. So all in favor, raise hands. I count 9 unanimous hands again. Thank you all. Any other questions? Is it discussion? Anything left? We're good. All right. Thank you for that.
Oh, okay. Do you want to do that?
Thank you for that, Councilmember Sepulveda. Then I think we can, and thank you so much, Nancy and Kim, for being here.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
If we stay on track, we don't have a tremendous amount of time for small business, but we did actually think it was a good opportunity to start the discussion. And I think really Ashley sent out some really good information, and actually, if you wouldn't mind just kind of reviewing some of that. And we also have the advantage of having Representative Love here to talk about what's happening at the state level as we start to think about how we want to make decisions and serve which sectors of our small business.
And before I start, I'm going to let Representative Love give a quick update on their meeting this week, just so you guys have all that information.
We're ready for you.
Okay. So this week, we met and looked at our projections based upon unemployment claims. And our main thing was to try to put a threshold together to say what we would look at doing in case unemployment claims kept coming in. And just as a side note, one of the reasons we put so much emphasis on that is because our unemployment trust fund needs to stay above $1 billion, or else when it dips below that, businesses get hit with an additional employment tax. And so what we've been doing is backfilling the unemployment trust fund the last month to make sure it doesn't dip that low, because it was at $1.2 billion and we had claims of $266 million at one point in time. So we've been putting money in that because, again, with businesses being closed down and or having reduced sales, the last thing we want to do is have them have to pay more employment tax on the employees. So that's why a good portion of what we have been putting in has been in that vein. So we did have a discussion about the nonprofit sector, which is $150 million, and about local governments, the $115 million, and just waiting to see now where we are with that, and if everything levels out like we think it should, we will have some money left over to, again, give more to local governments, but also to other nonprofits if everything keeps going like it is. So that's our plan right now, is to look and see. And again, as I stated earlier, we did not ask about it because we didn't think that it was going to happen. But when I had people call me about the application to find out that it was a 100% reimbursable grant, we then flagged that and are in the process of trying to fix that, because again, you don't have the time to put forth $25,000, $40,000 and then wait for the state to send you another check, when you could just get the $40,000 up front, go ahead and spend that, and then if you want to apply again, apply again. So that's the process we're working right now. With reference to small businesses, there's been a little bit of conversation about trying to go back in. One of the issues I raised, I think I may have also brought up here, is for a small business that opened in January that did not have the chance to pay taxes for last year's operation, was stuck in between either applying for PPP or applying for another loan, but they did not qualify for the state's program for small businesses. So we're looking at trying to find a way to help them out also. Didn't necessarily speak about Davidson County, but I do know that that's something we can look at also. Councilor Gamble brought up, I think, last week about also helping out some of those small businesses. So I just wanted to give that brief report about where we are at the state level.
Representative Love, is there a revenue threshold the state has been using to define small business?
We looked at really what the sales tax payments were, and that was a qualifier for that. I'm trying to pull my notes up now to see what it was for that. And if you come back to me after, I'll be able to find that for you.
Thank you.
I can actually answer that for you.
Okay.
It's all eligible businesses must have gross sales of 10 million or less was what that first round was.
20 million?
10.
Oh, 10.
I think it helped 28,000 businesses that first round. Roughly that 200 million we gave out helped that amount. And those checks have started going out. And what you can do, there's actually a website, if you want to go on to the state's website, you can see it broken down by county, what individual businesses have received, and also what federal money persons have received also. And that's tennessee.gov/FSHE.
So in your attachments that were handed out to you that are on your desk, just to add to that, the Tennessee Business Relief Program distributed $16.8 million to 1,800, almost 1,900 businesses in Davidson County as of 7/24. That's the last number that I have. If you look at the handouts that I gave you, those were provided by the Tennessee Department of Economic Development. We're really grateful to have their partnership on this. Just so you guys could get a better sense of what kind of businesses are in Davidson County, what the unemployment claims were, so you can see who's actually been laying people off and who's having to look for a new job. And so you can go through that. And then also, I did just the top page for you of the PPP loans. So the problem with that, and I mentioned it in the email, is if you got over 150,000, then your name was listed, but if it was less than that, then your business name is not listed. So this gave you a breakdown of the industries of who received PPP, so you can get a better sense as a whole of who actually received help. Otherwise, it is a massive document that you will probably not enjoy reading, and wanted to make that as easy for you as possible. And the same with unemployment. That gives you where you can see the employment numbers before and then the initial unemployment claims. And then the last one is just a better understanding of the businesses in Davidson County.
I apologize. I found my notes. The estimates we're looking at is if things go as we don't want them to go, and the economy remains flat, we would still have about $243 million left to spend after we have done the 115 for local governments, the 150 for nonprofits, 20 million for higher ed institutions, and including the 225 for small business relief. If things go as we don't want them to go, and there is no additional stimulus package from the federal government, and the economy just remains flat, we would still have $243 million left. The projection to be used for that 243 is to set aside an additional second phase of business relief of $75 million with specific emphasis on diverse business enterprises, $50 million for agriculture industry, $35 million for broadband, $7.5 for workforce development, $20 million for housing and rental assistance, and then $20 million for tourism industry recovery. For a total of $207 million.
Can I ask if independent music venues were brought up at all? Because I think we all received an email from them, and there's 14 of them in Nashville, and we are known for our music, and many of these venues didn't qualify for some of the help just based on, the 24-week rule and the 60 to 40% forgiveness, and they had some problems with that, which caused them to not qualify for it. And so now we're facing the fact that many of them might have to close because they haven't had any revenue coming in, they haven't had any help. And I wanted to know if that was brought up at all. If not, maybe the committee could consider that when we are talking about our small business relief, if the state hasn't taken that into account.
I want to comment on that first. So if you look at that last page that I gave you of which businesses are eligible, you'll note on here that theaters, auditoriums, performing arts centers, and similar facilities, as well as museums, zoos, and other similar attractions, are all listed in that first round of eligible funding. I don't know how much they received from the state, but they would have received funding based on this document. And Representative Love, you may have more you want to comment on that.
Right, and so one of the challenges that we are facing, particularly with the live music venues, the artists that will perform there might be able to get rent support or mortgage support from what we put in. The business owner might be able to get some PPP funds, maybe. They may have gotten a little bit of money from the state, but the challenge is with the state, they had to make sure the information was up to date. They didn't have to file, but they had to go back in and update the information to make sure that they were being classified as that certain particular business entity. So I think one of the challenges we're having is that we're having to make people aware of what category they may fall into, because the range on the business list was from barbershops to furniture stores, department stores, sports agents were even on there because that was a business. And so you got that range in there. I think it's a worthy conversation to have because even the tourism piece kind of gets added, but the question is, does the convention center fall in that, right? Because even some of the convention center's issues can't be paid for with COVID money because it doesn't really fit in that category, but it gets close enough to it that you would think it would. And so I think it's a worthy conversation to have about what it looks like to support that particular industry outside of what they might get from other sources.
I have a question, maybe a Representative Love. Okay, so the $225 million for small business from the state, has that already been distributed?
It's being.
Okay.
So one of the problems was the Department of Revenue, again, had a system that they were using, and it was based on, again, taxes that you paid, but you also had to come and update your banking information for the direct deposit. You also had to verify that you were still at that business. And again, that process was slow. We designed it so that it would not be like the unemployment insurance where you had to apply and then wait for that long process. Rather, on the front end, we would do it, but you still need to go in and verify that information. And then that was even slow getting up and running because we made that announcement almost a month ago now. But then some folks just started getting their checks here recently. And to be honest with you, when you look at what they were getting, it wasn't much compared to what they were losing.
What was do we know what the average,
Let me pull up my,
are these grants or loans?
no, just grants.
Okay.
I'm gonna pull up my other notes on that, just to give you an average of what that was.
One thing they did flag for Davidson County that made it a challenge was that we have so many headquarters that are based here, but they have workers and plants in other places. So it made it really hard to pull numbers that were specific for us.
And I wonder if there's also data on how many businesses have been served or impacted by this as well.
I think Ashley had that.
I do have that number. So it was almost 1,900 businesses in Davidson County.
And I think, you gave us a list of the registered businesses. Oh, did we get a
I
list?
did not.
Okay.
The state has not provided us with that.
Okay.
And so they're still, I wanted them to spend more of their time getting the money out to those businesses rather than pulling it for us. But it is certainly something I'll follow up with and ask for more. I have no problem doing that for you.
I know we're kind of running long today and probably won't get to any discussions about decisions on small businesses today, but I'd like to request that for the next meeting, we invite maybe some representatives from organizations such as Nashville Business Incubation Center or Urban League to come and talk about what's happening specifically here in Davidson County with businesses that they have contact with, similar to the presentation we had from Equity Alliance.
Would you like us to ask for somebody from ECD as well, from the state?
Yes, that'd be great.
Is obviously a huge issue. There are obviously other sources available for it, but it's hard when you look at these lists of industries and unemployment figures to figure out who really hasn't been able to tap into any help. And so I don't know who needs to come maybe help us with that, but if there is any information or any visitor that we could have that could try to identify, when you look at the Equity Alliance report, it talks about the disproportionate share of people of color that were not able to access certain assistance, but just anything we can get to understand better so that we are not duplicating, we are truly trying to fill a gap that these other sources are not going to cover, I think would be helpful.
Just want to follow up. I did find my notes here. So the business types range from barbershops, nail salons, tattoo parlors, gyms, restaurants, bars, hotels, theaters, sports teams, museums, amusement parks, bowling centers, golf courses, marinas, promoters of performing arts, sports and similar events, agents and managers for artists, athletes, entertainers, independent artists, writers, and performers. And the relief payments were from $2,000 to $30,000 in range. And like for artists, independent artists, you had 820 who received $2,000 or to receive $2,000, 135 who received or to receive $5,000. You had 12 who would receive $30,000. Then you go into furniture stores, clothing stores, shoe stores, jewelry stores, bookstores, department stores, but not the department stores we think about in the sense of Macy's or some other place, but those that are based here in Tennessee. And their range was from $2,000 to $30,000 also. So, some folks got in there, some people didn't, and that's a challenge because surely there's more than 1,000 independent artists, writers, and performers in Nashville. The question is, were they listing themselves as a business and then paying taxes versus just being an artist? I think that's where some folks getting caught in, is that if they weren't listing themselves, if Harold Love Music is my business and I'm the only artist and I'm getting paid, then I'm gonna qualify. But if I'm just an independent artist at these live venues, then I'm gonna get I'm going to miss it. It's the same problem we had really when you think about it with 1099 employees. If they establish their business, if I'm a yoga instructor, but I have Harold Love Yoga, but I get paid off of that, then when my business was shut down, I could file unemployment. But if I was just operating and just getting paid by my clients, now I'm self-employed, and the unemployment system was not designed to deal with me yet, which is why you had a delay of so many folks who were self-employed because they didn't have their business set up as them being the employee.
One more question. Is there any indication as to when the state may start distributing the set aside, the 243 and the 75 million for business?
I don't know if this is helpful for you, but we have a meeting this afternoon as well with some of the leadership for this money. And we can ask those questions as well to get a better sense instead of.
All that's contingent upon the next few weeks. So that's that extra amount that we would have if, again, either the economy was flat or it increased. And so the issue is, if it increases and we have more money set aside, everything in phase one will be included, plus another $100 million for small business. But keep in mind, again, this is across the entire state.
Edward?
It's because I think we've talked about it. We talked about the difficulty in navigating the system for individuals when it comes to mortgage and rent relief. We've also talked about the difficulty for nonprofits, and the state has identified the need to have intermediaries for these processes. Would it be worth it putting into the committee thinking about us contributing funds to an organization that will facilitate this process better for businesses? Because I feel like a lot of it is just confusion about what you need to do, right? There's a pot of money that's out there, and unfortunately it sounds like there are businesses that just didn't know how to access it. They didn't know that they qualified. They didn't believe that it was for them. And so time has passed. They've been put in financial burden. I feel like it would be good to consider, as our role, what can we do to put in place the type of systems that allow them to move more quickly and more efficiently to get to the dollars? Because if I'm a barber and I think that I'm going to qualify, I get frustrated and I just feel like it's not for me, I'm missing the time. Yoga instructor, whatever it may be. I mean, it seems like this list is meant to try to capture as many people as possible, yet the interactions with people on a day-to-day basis is that it's not for them and they can't get access to it. So there's clearly a bridge that needs to be built. So I feel like, and I don't know the right answer, but I feel like there's an opportunity and a strategy that we as a committee can do for those businesses here in Davidson County that kind of acts as a broker, without a better term.
And we have been approached by some of them are nonprofits. That's what they do is provide that kind of counseling and assistance to the small businesses. So I don't want to forget your question, Councilwoman Gamble. But for time, maybe we could, I think that the construct of our next meeting will be fully devoted to small business. And I want to make sure we want, to have somebody here who might be able to tell us who really hasn't been able to tap into the help. We probably want to have somebody here who can talk about the training and maybe, accessing help for small businesses, but sometimes they are getting the funds and they don't know where to best spend them. So that's what we've been hearing, is that there are organizations that can help a small business. And I think Ashley and I have talked about a handful, and we would be happy to reach out to them and see who could be here. What else would you like to hear at the next meeting or have available?
I think for me, almost going back to one of the first things I said, I think next week, having those resources of who could help navigate is invaluable for people. We can align it. And then the following week, just going back to it, I mentioned department heads. I meant everyone on the list.
Okay.
So like the music venue industry, hospitality industry, because I just have the feeling as if they're all sitting back thinking this wave of money is coming. And it may or may not, but we might be able to cobble together.
They do email me every week after the meeting.
Yes, they do, and call all of us. But if we can point out the resources for them, and perhaps another wave of dollars coming, after today's phone call at state, after more action, they could really help save a lot of people. But I think it's a twofold. Next week, we learn a lot more about what resource can be, and the following week, we let people come in that are on the sheet, explain what they need, why they need it. I bet we can cut that list in half by pointing them to other directions, ideally.
Yeah, I would like to suggest that we also consider, when we're looking at small business grants, incorporating some type of training, business training, workforce development, broadband, technical assistance within that, so that businesses are able to learn maybe how to pivot or things to sustain over long term beyond the grant that they're getting.
Thank you for that. This may be a dangerous question to ask. We have folks that have reached out to us. We have not had any formal application. These are folks that have taken it upon themselves. I am happy to go back. You have the list and the framework of everyone, and those would be the ones we would go back to. Are we okay with that? So the organizations that, and metro departments that you see on the framework are the ones that we will set up 2 weeks from now. I guess I'll take an official vote just to make sure that I see head nodding, but if you, everybody in favor of bringing those folks in 2 weeks from now, we'll get a raise of hands.
Representative Love, did you have a question?
Just a statement after you
Okay. Per Sean's request also, it's all of the additional requests, so kind of everything in the requested column, not just metro departments, but also the other folks that, even if there's not a dollar amount, you can see the reinforcing, the infrastructure, supporting health, all of those. Okay. We'll figure out what the right time frame is.
And I was just going to raise this point that when we had the flood in 2010, there were so many folks who were of the belief that when they heard that FEMA was coming, that everything was going to be okay. And when FEMA showed up, I remember very distinctly that they said to us, our job is not to make you whole, but to just help along the way. And it helped us understand that we had to get used to that. And so I think we're having so many people call and reach out because it's such a desperate time. And when they hear $121 million, their first thought is, look, this can make all of us whole. And that's the struggle. I mean, this is even outside the realm of a normal council or state level budget process. This is an extreme situation. And so, I appreciate the work that we're doing because it's helping some folks get closer to being whole in this difficult time. And much of it is giving people hope that it's going to be all right if we get through this. So I just want to lift that up.
Thank you for that. Another question?
I'm a little concerned about if we bring all of these people in on one meeting, we're going to be here for 10 hours. Is it possible, would it be agreeable to break that up a little bit? And I think, in my opinion, the reinforcing the infrastructure, the businesses that are struggling or whatever, is much more of an urgent need than departmental stuff. I think
External versus internal?
Yeah, I think, I'd rather break that up,
Okay.
just because that's going to be a really long meeting. Again, I think those funds need to go out first, just because they need this money. This is bonus stuff from departments. I mean, it's needed, but I'm just saying it's not like an emergency need,
We can also help with budgeting the time, Councilwoman, to set a schedule and stick to it and say this is exactly how much time you have and cut people off.
Right.
But we'll work with our external folks in 2 weeks. So next week will be I'll call it more the educational, and we'll get some more information and foundation. 2 weeks from now, we'll have external opportunities, to hear from the folks, and then 3 weeks, we'll more along the lines of department.
I'm sorry, next.
Education. So we'll have a few folks, like I think Ashley mentioned, the EDC, NBIC, maybe some of our other partners that could give us idea of training and, yep.
Gotcha.
All right. No other questions or comments. I believe we're adjourned.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.org.